Donkey Kong Bananza has already been broken by speedrunners despite only being out for a few short weeks, and the glitches and skips they've found are astounding, allowing them to bypass entire sequences, power-ups, and levels. The game was broken so fast that the first skips were quickly made obsolete as larger time saves were discovered, and some skips underwent multiple changes in the span of a day as players figured out ways to cut out more content. In today's video, we'll see how speedrunners broke the game by looking at the tricks they use inside of levels, the skips that let them bypass entire levels, and how they're able to skip Bananza form transformations that are supposed to be mandatory. Donkey Kong Bananza is an incredible game, and if you've ever wondered if you could make a game yourself, then this video's sponsor, Boot.dev, has you covered. Boot.dev is an online service that teaches you how to code, starting with the basics in languages like Python and then expanding into more complex topics as you widen your foundation. Having learned to code myself, I can say that one of the hardest parts is sitting at your desk and writing code for hours at a time. But the cool thing about Boot.dev is that they treat the process like a game, rewarding you with experience points, levels, and achievements. They even have quests you can complete and a leaderboard for everyone using their service. A lot of the courses Boot.dev offers are for back-end programming, but they also have some courses on game development, such as learning to build asteroids in Python and building a Pokédex in Go. And with a 30-day refund policy, if you don't like it, you can get your money back. Go to Boot.dev and use my code Abyssoft to get 25% off your entire first year on the annual plan. And with that, let's get back to the video. Donkey Kong Bananza is split up into levels which are called layers, and the fourth layer you enter is Canyon, which has a lot to offer players, with 80 Banandium gems to collect, a mini-boss, and boss. But we're going to skip doing any of that and go straight to the final boss, Stomping Clomper. You might be wondering two things here. How is this possible, and why are we skipping every Banandium gem? Don't we need to upgrade any of DK's abilities? The answer to both of those is that DK's base abilities are powerful enough that we don't need to upgrade them at all. This may sound strange since one of his abilities gives him a double jump, but as you'll see, his base moveset has been stretched to its absolute limit by speedrunners. And the best place to see it in use is Canyon Layer skip. In a normal playthrough, you're supposed to go through a sub-layer, fight the Mad Mixer minecart mini-boss, then head towards the end of the layer and fight Stompin' Clomper. But with DK's basic movement, you can reach a platform you aren't supposed to have access to at the start and go straight to the boss. It involves 3 different pieces of movement tech, a turf surf, a punch stall, and a roll punch. By grabbing a piece of turf, you can have DK jump on it and surf across the terrain. And by canceling a turf surf mid-air, you get a small speed boost, which is super important for making this gap. After the turf surf, you need to punch stall, which is exactly what it sounds like, as punching in the air causes DK to stall, which preserves his momentum. And by finishing this combo with a roll punch, you can bridge the gap to the platform that leads to Stompin' Clomper, the final boss of the Canyon Layer. After defeating the boss, you need to travel to the next layer, and while this is mostly an auto-scroller, a small time save has been found. When you press B, DK gets a small speed boost as the camera zooms in, so by holding B and letting go repeatedly, you can chain together boosts and speed these sections up, which brings us to our next layer skip. Not all layer skips require advanced movement or bridging large gaps. In fact, the landfill layer skip is perhaps the easiest of them all. In a normal playthrough, you're supposed to dig down through this layer as opposed to climbing to the top of it. But by climbing the wall in the starting area, you can get out of bounds and fall all the way to the bottom, saving about 20 seconds. The last layer skip we're looking at is on the resort layer, which doesn't have too much for players to do on it anyway. But it does have liftoff ore, a very special piece of terrain that creates platforms and can be used to gain lots of vertical height. There are 2 ways to find liftoff ore, in piles hidden throughout the level, or from rainbow sharks that leave trails of it when they are punched. Normally, you're supposed to use them to climb from island to island so you can reach the top of the watermelon tree. But speedrunners have simplified this process. By launching a rainbow shark off at a certain angle, you can make a bridge towards the watermelon. Then, by luring another up the bridge, you can extend it further before grabbing a piece of the rainbow terrain and rocketing up to the watermelon. That was the initial method found by Karateman, but it was later discovered that you could skip the second rainbow shark and do it with a single bridge, provided you used the ostrich Bananza and glided to the watermelon. completing the resort layer in just under 2 minutes. That's the first time we've seen a Bananza form, which are special transformations you unlock throughout the game, as they're required to complete certain areas and sequences. Or so the developers thought, because speedrunners have cut 2 of these Bananzas out completely. But before we look at how these were removed from the speedrun, we need to look at the most obvious skip that speedrunners missed. When you unlock a Bananza, you're taken to a tutorial level that teaches you how to use it. However, if you press pause, there's a menu option to skip the tutorial and go back to the main game. And if you look at the early world records, you'll see that this skip wasn't used, because nobody in the speedrunning community had ever opened the menu to look until a few days after the game was released. This just goes to show that sometimes the people dedicated to breaking a game can miss skips that are sitting in plain sight or are even built into the game itself. So getting fresh eyes on something is always a good thing, which brings us to the 2 Bananzas that players have managed to skip: Snake and Zebra. We'll start with Zebra since it was the first that was skipped, and to understand why this skip is important, we need to understand what Zebra does. Unlocked on the freezer layer that has slippery terrain and bridges that fall apart, the Zebra Bananza is able to walk without slipping, and it can also traverse the collapsing bridges without causing them to fall apart. This is a big deal later in the game, as there are sections of collapsing terrain spanning large gaps that you're supposed to use Zebra form to get over. However, if a way around these obstacles could be found, you could skip unlocking the Zebra Bananza and all of Freezer Lair itself. We'll look at that section later in the game in a bit, because there's another problem. Before the freezer layer, there's a layer called Divide, which lets you go to either the freezer or forest layers after you beat it, with each layer giving you a different Bananza form, Zebra and Ostrich. After these 2 layers is one called Junction, which can only be beaten after both freezer and forest are cleared, as when you exit each layer, you're taken to a specific spot in the Junction layer where you need to destroy a Terror Voider that raises half of a bridge. If you skip raising the bridge on one side, there's a massive gap, and if you skip raising it in both layers, the gap is even bigger. But, as speedrunners do when presented with a problem, they started looking for ways to get across without unlocking anything. Within 3 days of the game's release, it was discovered that by unlocking Ostrich in Forest Lair, you can turf surf, then punch stall, and then glide across the rest of the gap, which let you barely make it to the other side and skip the Zebra Bananza. But, on the same day this was found, another player was able to make the gap by building a terrain bridge and turf surfing off of it. However, this method wouldn't be implemented into the speedrun for one reason. The Ostrich Bananza is extremely broken and has uses in later levels that make beating the game much faster. And to get an example of this, let's look at the Forbidden Lair. This lair has a lot of small islands you need to navigate to, along with sub-layers and a boss fight. But the biggest issue is that you have to grind 12,000 gold so you can unlock special terrain that's used to bridge the gaps. And in the first speedruns, it took about 8 minutes to clear the lair. However, with the power of Ostrich Bananza, you can skip grinding gold entirely, because by punch stalling and turf surfing, you don't need the special terrain at all. Oddly, you can still pick the terrain up, it just doesn't have its special ability without paying the toll, and because of this, you can go straight to the end and fight Void Kong. This brings us to the next Bananza that runners have skipped, the Snake Bananza, which is a shame because Ratley was the best animal buddy from DKC2. The Snake Bananza is unlocked on the Radiance layer, and it has the ability to charge a jump for extreme height, so it's very useful later in the game. It's used on the Radiance layer to collect a key and climb a tower specifically designed to be cleared with the charge jump. But just like the Zebra Bananza, the snake-specific sequences were solved to be snakeless. Showcasing once again why the Ostrich Bananza is broken, the Void Key required to progress further in the lair is supposed to be obtained with snake form. But by punch canceling to the platform, then turf surfing, you can collect the key. Which brings us to the tower climb. No, not that one. This one. Much like the Toxic Tower in DKC2, the Snake Tower was designed to be scaled with snake form, but the turf surf mechanic is so broken that by switching between Kong and Ostrich forms, you can reach the top without using the charge jump, letting you skip the Snake Bananza entirely. Skipping snake form posed a problem, however, and to understand why, we need to look at the final platforming sequence in the game. As you're making your way to the final K. Rool fight, there's a massive crumbling bridge, with runners initially using Zebra to travel across it, but as we know now, Zebra form is skipped. So, how do they get across the bridge? By using Snake Form's high jump, you could switch to Ostrich, then punch, cancel, and glide to get across the falling bridge sections. But now that Snake Form is skipped, runners needed a way across these platforms. And Jakezsr theorized that a snakeless skip was possible, and shortly after this, Niinpalk proved that it was possible using Ostrich only. However, Niinpalk's method is a bit slow, so another group of runners looked at ways to speed it up, and they discovered a faster snakeless method. By throwing terrain at the lava snake pillars, it turns into gold which can be climbed on without taking damage, and by punch canceling, you can jump between them. In fact, the earlier parts of this sequence can also be turf surfed and punch cancelled across, meaning the only Bananzas you need to speedrun the game are Ostrich and Kong. And the only reason Kong is picked up is because the game forces you to do so. Ostrich is so broken that the barrel you're supposed to use to enter the K. Rool fight can be skipped entirely, which brings us to boss fight skips. If we look at the Void Kong fight, there is a quick kill, but unfortunately, I can't explain how it works because it's currently not understood how or why it happens. Some players theorize that hitting him at a specific point in his attack animation triggers it, while others think it could be pure RNG, but what we do know is that it is possible to end this fight very fast. This brings us to K. Rool, and while there aren't any ways of skipping his phases currently known, there are ways to speed them up. For instance, in Phase 1, he shoots cannonballs at you that you're supposed to hit back at him. However, it's actually faster to skip hitting the cannonballs and just walk up and pummel the motherfucking dog out of him. In K. Rool's final phase, he will periodically fill the arena with poison, which not only takes a lot of time to disperse, but also causes lag. However, these poison phases are triggered when his HP reaches certain thresholds, and if you manage to stack enough damage on him during his regular phases, you can skip the toxic arena sequence altogether. Given that this game is so new, it should come as no surprise that skips were found while I worked on this video, and 3 major ones were discovered: juice boosting, chicken jockey skip, and fat chaining. Juicy rails are normally used to surf across as if DK was an unlockable character in the new Tony Hawk remakes, but their physics can be a bit wonky. Initially, a player encountered a situation where they were launched off the railing at high speeds, and later that same day, not only did speedrunners replicate it, they were already using it to clip through walls and get massive height. The applications of juice boosting are just being explored now, but it's incredible what they've been able to achieve in such a short amount of time, and you're probably wondering what chicken jockey skip and fat chaining are. Chicken jockey skip was found by Niinpalk, and its name has nothing to do with chickens or jockeys. It's just another speedrun skip with a ridiculous name. On the groove layer, you normally need to find 3 music sources in order to proceed, but by getting a piece of terrain stuck into a wall, you can clip through a locked door and skip unlocking 2 of them. Fat chaining stands for Fast Air Turf Surf, and it was discovered by Nicro, the runner who set the first sub-hour in Mario Odyssey. How it works is quite simple. By pressing buttons in a certain cadence, it's possible to repeat turf surfs and gain height infinitely. This is huge, as it may allow runners to skip the Ostrich Bananza, meaning a speedrun with no Bananzas is entirely on the table. However, due to the precise button mashing, this trick isn't easy, and it's currently being debated on if it will be allowed in any percent or if a leaderboard split will occur. Let me know what you think down below. Currently, the record is sitting at 1 hour and 17 minutes, and if fat chaining is allowed, a sub 1 hour time isn't out of the question. However, there's one final thing we need to look at, and that's what the game says to you if you skip content. On the racing layer, there's a race you do with Rambi where you have access to liftoff ore, and it was discovered you can use the liftoff ore to skip over the track like you're in an old Mario Kart game. What's funny about this is that if you perform the shortcut, Pauline will tell you after that maybe you should go back and complete the race, indicating that the devs expected players to do this. And if you skip getting Bananza forms, then beat the game, Pauline will say a similar voice line, meaning the devs left a small Easter egg for speedrunners. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next exciting episode of Abyssoft Z.